It's astonishing. And again, at the risk of being redundant here, I'll have to say, there is no way that your politicians, no matter how venal and useless, in any sovereign country, and the public service even within that country, would ever do what you just described willingly or with their own volition. So it's just a very important message for any watcher. None of this comes organically.
Of course none of it's organic, guys. It doesn't come from within your own countries and your politicians. It comes from up above. We know exactly who it is. So I'm here with Eddie Hobbs in Counterpoint Studio, and we're discussing the new Future 40 document which came out of the Department of Finance, and it's absolutely horrific. And it doesn't just apply to Ireland. It's the exact same template as is applying to any of your European countries, or indeed to an extent in America too. So it's a great conversation. I kind of took the gloves off a bit here. I hope you enjoy the fact that I wasn't mincing my words. Fantastic conversation. Just have a look.
So, Ivor, you in the past you've looked at the Danish situation, the Danish data, and when you compare and contrast what Nick is describing as chaos, and he's right. Let's call it's chaotic. We don't have a system. We're throwing them into centres. There's no integration or assimilation. It's just a complete and utter heap. And now the spoil the vote is after changing at least the rhetoric. But when you look at the Danish system, what do you see?
Yeah, it's black and white. And to be honest, there's another point as well. Often in data analysis, the data you see should be what you'd expect from logic, right? An understanding of psychology and everything else. And it lines up exactly. It's what you'd expect. So the non-European migrants have a much higher level of crime. And that's, again, not just imprisonment, but crime in general, because they may not get imprisoned to the same rate as Irish. So Nick's absolutely right. You've got to be careful. So this is just crime overall that's logged. And then their descendants, or the children from non-European migrants.
In Denmark.
This is all Denmark, again, have a much, much higher rate also. So there's a second order. So this is going to be a multiplying problem, because as there's more migrants, more birth rates actually within migrants. And we know that the second generation has really high crime rates relative to Danish or European migrants, who are actually not that bad, actually. Interesting. These numbers are huge and growing. We know to a certainty from what Nick said and from the data we can get in Ireland, even though it's restricted. But what we have, and then using Denmark as a proxy and being reasonable, there may be some societal differences, etc., but triangulate it and put it together, Ireland essentially will have a similar thing. And you know, Eddie, there was an article came out the last couple of days, very controversial. I can't say the actual source, but I think it was Devon or Dorset. No, I think it was Devon in England, where there's a lot of migrants suddenly coming in, and there's one community of 300,000 people. And apparently the police said, 56% of sexually related kind of assaults are from non-IPAS type migrants, okay? Which means 44% were from said people. But they only make up around 1% of the population.
Well, that's extraordinary. But I mean, if logic applies, if you're coming in from certain countries that we don't have to name, culturally they're completely different view, especially about assault against women. But when you just broaden it out and you look at the Danish asylum system itself, what's bringing this into my head, as you were saying, well, you look, there's almost a 50-50 split in the local population there. But in Denmark, when that happens, they flatten the place to stop ghettoization. Is that correct? Is that one of their
that's the article I shared with you today. Amanda Akas, political correspondent, astonishing article, and it's entitled "Reform's Been Pretty Quiet Since Labour Started Exploring the Danish Migration Model, and This Is Why." But you're absolutely right. In there, it's incredible, the actual details. One of them is the number of successful asylum claims in Denmark has fallen to a 40-year low, because Denmark are simply doing what our politicians and our government of our country should be obviously doing. That's why over 80% of people in surveys say the government here in Ireland need to sort this. But a 40-year low they've hit in Denmark of successful asylum, and 95% of failed claimants are deported. I think we're running 1 or 2%.
Yeah.
or something like that.
Yeah.
So that's how bad Ireland is. But to your point, they have really tough rules on family reunification.
Yeah,
Both
can I stop you there? No, family reunification is like a motorway where there's a lane and suddenly it's a motorway. I mean, that really surges, doesn't it? Your rules on family reunification. So obviously they're very different than Ireland.
Oh, well, Denmark is doing the right thing, and they've identified that as a massive motorway and a huge problem for their country, their people, their culture, and their future. So, yeah, they've taken care of it. Both the sponsor and their partner are required to be at least 24 years old. The Danish government mentioned arranged marriages. That might be the age thing. But then the sponsor must also not have claimed welfare for over 3 years. That's a big exclusion there. A huge one, I would say, if you look at what we have in Ireland, and must provide a financial guarantee for their partner, documented. Both must also pass a Danish language test. Danish. So it's a different universe. But to what you mentioned, in 2018, Denmark introduced what is called a ghetto package, a controversial plan to radically alter some residential areas, including by demolishing social housing in areas with over 1,000 residents, of which more than 50% were immigrants and their descendants from non-Western countries. So if you have 1,000 residents or more and over 50% are from non-Western countries, because Denmark know that the Western type migrants, there's not really a problem so much, yeah, they look at demolishing. And the left of centre government, interestingly, they've got a left of centre government, but by their government being aligned with the people's wishes, doing the obvious right thing, which is quite easy once you have some resolve, they're holding off all the right-wing candidates and parties, which makes sense, because if a left-leaning government does the right thing, then the right wing won't get any advantage over them.
Well, then
Clever.
Maybe we should get a few quid together and send Holly Cairns over on a plane to Copenhagen and have a chat with the left-wing government. Anyway, look, I'm going to press on. I'll tell you why, because it's directly related to our next clip. And this is, I want to now talk about what Micheál Martin has been telling the world about our zealotry towards the whole green agenda, which I'm coming to when I get to the Department of Finance report, which is really startling. But let's just start with, this is Micheál Martin, or Taoiseach, Fianna Fáil leader in Brazil, during last week at COP30 on your behalf. Have a listen to this.
Climate change is unarguable. The science is undeniable. Temperatures are rising and the clock is ticking. If we are not prepared to tell our citizens the truth about this, we are failing them and this planet in the most profound way. Science cannot be denied. The European Union, of which Ireland is a part, remains steadfast in its determination to play its full part. We in Europe have now set our sights on reducing our collective emissions by 90% by 2040. This will undoubtedly be challenging, but it is necessary to drive the investment, innovation, and invention that a transition to a fully decarbonized economy and society will require. Ireland will continue to be part of that effort. Change is underway across our economy and society to steer Ireland towards a decarbonised future powered by renewable energy.
Well, I mean, that could have been a speech made by Roderick O'Gorman. This is COP30. Well, by the way, where my data shows that 29% drop in heads of state attended COP30 in Brazil because the big beast has left the building, the United States of America. We were talking about that when we looked at the Trump speech. Remember that? And here we have Micheál Martin, absolutely transformed as the most green of the greens, telling the world that we're ploughing ahead. But how can they plough ahead, Ivor, if the biggest beast is gone? China isn't playing ball either. It just seems to be a European issue, which is an issue that Professor Judith Curry has said in our most recent episode when I interviewed her about her book, about rethinking the whole climate change thing. And it's just extraordinary that Europe seems to be on a suicide mission when it comes to the green agenda, and we're now leading it, according to Micheál Martin.
Yeah, well, I look at Michal there, and to be quite honest, what popped into my head was Rumpelstiltskin, when they discover his name in his fury, it's quite comical to look at him. And also he's talking about stuff that, like, to be honest, my dog would know more about science. That's being very fair with Michal Martin. I mean, the nature of who he is. So he says the science is settled, essentially, which is an absurd. It's a contradiction in terms.
It's an oxymoron, isn't it?
It's an oxymoron. Science cannot be settled. You can only have the best data to support the leading hypothesis. And we know that the fraud in the climate change mafia industry has been enormous. We have so much of it documented. I mean, Judith, you've got Professor Happer, and so many more fantastic people in the field, true experts, who have pointed out that it's not a crisis. It's just a steady, slow rise in temperature. Very questionable links to CO2. But that's the kind of thing we can expect from our politicians. It's a purely political thing. And therefore, politically, Trump has stepped out because he knows it's nonsense, largely. China obviously have not engaged because they know it's nonsense. I guess Russia similarly. So the leaders of countries where they're interested in their own growth and their people or whatever, and they're just not going to engage in this nonsense. But people like Michal Martin will engage because his paymasters in the UN and all the way from Rockefeller Trilateral Commission and Bilderberg and all the Club of Rome and all the players and powerful institutions and the Commission, the EU, who have spent a half century building this control mechanism up and funding it with enormous amounts of money, right? They now want to use this for their political ends. It's a purely political issue.
Yeah, well, let's. Do you know what? I think what I'll do next is I'm going to play this little message because and just bear with, come back pretty quickly, because thereafter we're going to go straight into this absolutely jaw-dropping report called Future 40 from the Department of Finance, which feeds directly into what Michal Martin was saying on your behalf in front of the world in Brazil.
Well, guys, really quickly, I'm going to take advantage of Eddie's interlude here and just have a quick word on the link below to Pure Gold in London, who I work with over the last few years. And fascinating things are happening in the world of gold and silver and platinum and other precious metals. So recently, all-time highs were hit, and then the paper market, long story, shenanigans, the price was driven down by futures contracts released in large numbers in the dark hours of the night. And I expected gold actually and silver to correct down lower. Perfectly expected in a sense from technical analysis. But already in the last few days, it's just soaring back up again, both gold and silver. And as I said to my wife, it's like a beach ball you hold under the water. At some point, it has to pop back up. So the costs are going to fly up in the coming years. It's inevitable, really, with de-dollarization. And I just think it behooves people with pension or savings or other funds to secure or hedge a certain element of them in physical gold and silver. And again, no financial advice, but you can get the link below for a personal consultation with the guys in Pure Gold in London and go from there, explore your options. And now back to Eddie.
Well, welcome back. What you won't know is that this huge report came out from the Department of Finance, Ivor. As you know, I've asked you to look at it as well. It's 215 pages long, and it sketches out their view of where Ireland is going to go over the next 40 years, in other words, to 2065. And just first line I'm going to put up, and then I'm going to put up a few slides from there. It's directly from the report, which I've studied in detail. I'm just going to put up a few slides, and then we're going to have a chat about them. This is the first slide. It's 3.2 in the report. And it looks at where we are now. There you go, Ivor. That's where we are now. That's the trajectory we're on when it comes to CO2 emissions. You can see it declining there on the dark line, and that's where we're going to go. Or we're going to go deeper. And you can see there on the B slide the target for 2030, which means we're committing to reduce our carbon emissions by a further 30%. By the way, we'll be down to 100% by 2050. That's the plan.
Yeah, it's just, what can I say, it's utterly absurd. So the real argument would be to what extent you need to reduce carbon dioxide emissions at all, right? But to put numbers like that in, it's just insane. I have friends in relatively senior and technical levels in power generation. And they told me a year ago, they said, Ivor, the game is actually up. Because even within the power generation circles, where 5 years ago, people used to all go along with the narrative. And he said it was like talking to zombies. Engineers who would actually go along. And when my friend would ask a question, like a really good question about a fact, they'd glaze over because they were programmed that this was the way. He said that's falling apart now. You're seeing people getting shifty and embarrassed because they know that the wind and all the other stuff and the decarbonisation will never work. It's impossible. So it's crazy. But I'll just pick up one thing from Bjorn Lomborg in the financial press in January this year. If you did next to nothing and you believe the modelling, and by 2100, the year 2100, we did go up around 2 point something degrees, which is very extreme, even in the modelling. The UN figures themselves that say we'd be 40 or 450% in GDP, every individual, richer by 2100 than we are today. Well, with the full impact of that several degrees of climate crisis, right, allowed to occur, we'd only be 440% richer than we are today. So the figures from one half of the corrupt United Nations are putting the lie to the figures from the other corrupt half who deal with climate change. So in other words, there's a few percent less GDP richness per person, even if you did next to nothing and let the temperature rise. And that, Eddie, is without even. The real data would say that the temperature rise is not in our control anyway.
Your carbon costs, which is up to, what was it, per ton of CO2 that you're using, is going to go up by 40% between now and 2030. I can tell you that the report says that the amount of miles that you're going to drive is going to fall by 20% very shortly. In other words, you're going to be paying per mile you drive, and that's going to go to 50% mileage reduction by the mid 2030s to 2040. You can see where it's going. It's going all the ways down into poverty. I mean, because there is no other way, because the alternatives, and by the way, we're going to have 80% of our electricity coming from wind and solar while all this is happening. I mean, this is extraordinary stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, Eddie, it's, I don't know, it's just hard to believe. I read the whole report, but I really appreciated your summary. It's literally insane. I'd have to say, and the senior engineering friends I know who I've discussed climate with at length, it's all in agreement.
Do you want to comment on the slide? Look, that really summarises it, doesn't it?
You can see on the left, growth rate of expenditure. I mean, climate change on the left there, as you said, doubled the healthcare and long-term expenditure for even pensions and other thing and housing. That is insanity in one graph. There should be almost nothing for climate change per se. Almost nothing. And what makes the whole thing a joke is, what is the impact of climate change on Ireland? Let's say there was an impact. And
I'll show you. Can I just put up slide 1014 there? This is from the report, slide 1014. And what this is, Ivor, is you can see we're on a trajectory downwards at the moment in terms of our debt. We're the best boys in the class. And just look at what happens when we embark on this linear model that the Department of Finance has been cooking up to our debt. We're back up to burst levels. Once you go above 100%, you're getting into real trouble unless you're the United States of America with the world reserve currency. But look at where we're going. We're going up to an excess of 140% of debt to GNI. That's gross national income. If this plan were to play out.
Yeah, well, it's clear from this report that you can see our public servants now are either sociopathic or classic useful idiots. So I would say they're hypnotized useful idiots, a bit like people during COVID who obviously we had a mass formation. These public servants and these financial people are involved in their own mass formation, which has been given unto them by the UN, IPCC and all of Rockefeller and Bilderberg's other organs. In fairness, we have the full history. We know where they came from and who funds them. And therefore they have things like this. Let's drive ourselves into poverty over the next 40 years. Let's race to net zero and to our own destruction and demise. I mean, that's what they're saying.
Yeah, but just look at what happens, right? What the model does, what this linear model does, And I'm going to come on now to slide 4.9 in the report. What the linear model does is that it says that the Irish labour force goes negative. In other words, the amount of children that we have produced that are capable of working begins to go negative. In other words, decline. From if you look at the graph there, you can see the kind of green turquoise colour around the mid-30s. And there above it, that's the immigration coming into Ireland in order to meet the labour demand from the rate of spending, including on climate change, in the economy and growth in the economy. So what the report is silent on is what is the shape of Irish culture in 2065 and society. So culture and society doesn't get mentioned. Political impact doesn't get mentioned. It's just that this is what we're doing and that's it. And it's linear as well on the approach to how much labour will be needed to come into Ireland to do all of the stuff that the Department of Finance expects us to do over the next 40 years. I find that absolutely remarkable. Plus the fact that they don't tell us what are. I don't know what the numbers yet, but I'm going to bloody well look at it. But it would appear to me that we're on, like when you extrapolate this out, we're on target to become a minority in our own country.
Yeah, and I just thinking there a while, the price of everything and the value of nothing. That is these people. I mean, there is conspicuous by its absence. You're absolutely correct. There is no reference to the health of the Irish people, to our culture, to our societal health. Zero. Right? It's all numbers, and the numbers are utterly corrupt. The thing is, though, really, and the unifying thing of all this is, how could you by chance end up with a political class and a public service and financial experts, apparently, who could come up with something that's so wrong on every single facet of their report? That can't happen by chance. It happens because this is not by chance, it's by design. So every single absurdity of this report, from the mass migration to the destruction of our culture and our heritage and our nationality, and to the flagrant burning of our tax dollars on a made-up crisis, and I could go on and on, every facet of this report has already been documented, going back decades, as you well know. So it comes originally from the 1950s from Rockefeller Brothers Fund, and it has grown and grown and grown into the UN and the EU, and now it's breaking on our shores. And I think, Eddie, you said yourself something I didn't realise. Back in 2016, 17, 18, our public servants, or perhaps public serpents might be more correct, they apparently were contracted by the UN goons to actually draft up the sustainable development claptrap that the UN then said, oh, that's very good, Irish lads. We'll use that. But of course, they wrote what they were told to write. Isn't that the case?
Well, it was, yeah, with the Kenyans, actually. They were given the job from 2013, 2015. But what I find one of the things that really jumped out at me when I read the report is this is just linear thinking. Yeah. There's no agility here at all. I did a complete summary on have it here on what is missing from the report. Missing is just the dark space between the stars, as I call it. There's no reference to the social, cultural, or political impacts. And this is extraordinary. There's a kind of a box ticking. I'll show it actually. It's slide 7.1. To be fair to them, they did put in something on artificial intelligence and impact on labour demand, and they quoted from a report from nearly 3 years ago now, and they put it into quadrants on what. I mean, this isn't their stuff. It's coming from somebody else saying, oh, there's going to be an impact on certain occupations, and they're put into quadrants there. You can knock yourself out looking at it all day long. It's irrelevant because until it happens, we won't really know. But the point is that the Department of Finance model, which is linear to 2065, is saying this is where we're going to end up. These are all the people we need. But AI is going to have an impact. And here's a fancy graph to show the impact. But it takes no account of the reduction in labour demand because of quantum computers and artificial intelligence pouring through into our modern economy. And I'm saying that this is nonsense. The whole report is nonsense if that's the case. Am I misreading that?
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, the likes of that AI there, it's total tokenism. So they grab some paper. It's like they got in a summer student from college or whatever, a placement, and got them to look after the AI bit, because we'd better say something about AI because it's all the buzz, and we don't have a clue what we're talking about. So they get the student to do it. It's pathetic, but it makes sense because all they're doing is creating a report to reflect their master's desires. And I don't
Well,
like...
it's funny you should say that because what's one of the things that's missing from the report is there's nothing at all about any increase in defence spending.
Exactly. Because everything in this report is straight from his master's voice. Therefore, there'll be nothing about the health of the Irish, nothing about our culture, our history, nothing about our ability to deal with the fact that a friend of mine said a couple of years ago, even before it got insane as it is now, he said basically this is a massive security issue for Ireland because we've got fighting age men coming in. They're being bussed in huge numbers. They've got powerfully different philosophies and will not integrate. So they are a block or multiple blocks that will create groups of people who have no affinity to the Irish way of life. And we're flooding ourselves, and they're already outnumbering our standing army.
Yeah, but
and we'll go on to outnumber our standing army vastly.
But leaving aside the local security issue, right? I mean, Trump has pushed the European Union into spending up to 5% between infrastructure and defence in order to catch up with their spending on NATO. I'm not saying we should join NATO at all, but I mean, but Ireland is being singled out at the moment in America for some very rough treatment. I know this because I've been briefed on it, and it's and they're basically eating the face now of the Irish over the position that we've taken, which they regard as an anti-American position with regards to what's going on between Israel and in Gaza with the Palestinians and all the rest of it, and overstating our case as they would see it. Now, we've good reason to do that, but my point is that that this plan from the Department of Finance is not in any way, shape or form leaning in towards doing anything to play our part in European security. We want to stay neutral, but we're not prepared to spend on security on the base of this plan.
Yeah, but again, they may have been criticised by the Yanks, but the real powers that be that are driving all of this nonsense, you know, they're not really asking that of the Irish, and that's why it's not in here. You know, it goes back to the same point, Eddie. What's in here is what they're told to put in here, essentially. And that's what people need to understand. There's no autonomy here from the Irish politicians or the Irish public service, right? They are simply following orders to a large extent.
Well, there's another thing in here that you know, it's implied, right? It's subtle, and it's saying that we're going to be putting massive investment, you know, 75% outside of Dublin. We're going to be building up these 5 cities, and then there's this term using district heating. And the minute I saw that, what does that mean to you?
15-minute cities.
15-minute cities. Can you just explain that?
Well, all these so-called conspiracy theories were of course just leaked strategies. So they're never where. There's the occasional real conspiracy theory that's nonsense, you know, and flat earthy. But the vast majority, as we well know, have all come true because they were simply leaks from the machine, and then they turned out to be true. The 15-minute cities, the rhetoric all the way through this report, the main thread throughout it all is climate. And the reason is because climate is the primary strategy to get in place the new globalist management of the Western population. Climate is their linchpin. And that's why even when Trump walks away, and even when Bill Gates the other day said, yeah, it's not really a crisis, right? Even when those sub-politics happen, our own lot cannot let it go. I mean UN. And we saw the head of the UN coming out with COP30 there the last few days, screeching about climate and we're all going to die. And they now are demanding the government shut down conversations around climate because it's potentially going to stop them reaching their insane goals.
Well, this is the disinformation and
misinformation.
Hence the hate speech laws throughout the world. Yeah.
Hate speech laws. And the WHO, by the way, I've just found out, have come out with a new AI-driven system that they're giving free to 110 governments around the world. And guess what it'll do? It'll scan all the conversations going on pandemic-related stuff, and it will allow them to identify conversations that are unhelpful to their goals. So all of the UN organs are ramming ahead for censorship because, let's be honest, the climate thing is so inherently absurd, it cannot brook discussion. You cannot allow people to discuss it for even a minute. You have to say the science settled because that's what you have to do with the big lie. If the lie is big enough, and this goes all the way back to Goebbels and others, you cannot allow any conversation around the big lie when it's a whopper. because any conversation will rapidly start collapsing.
So this is the definition of malinformation. So it's information that isn't disinformation or misinformation. It's right, but you're just not allowed to say it.
You're not allowed to say it because it goes against UN and globalist goals, and that's it. But I forget what you asked a slightly separate question at the start of that, perhaps.
Yeah, well, I was just kind of making the point that that we're in an extraordinary situation where let's call it spade a spade. That the whole thing about climate change is beginning to fall apart at the edges.
Yes,
and yet it's taking ages for this to get through to the virtue signalling political establishment we have. I mean, we had Micheál Martin. I mean, he may have been dressed in a green jumpsuit when he was over in COP30, and then you have Holly Cairns, who's also, I mean, she could just easily be the head of the Green Party, and we need to wake up here and actually say to ourselves, hold on a second, none of this has been explained in this manner and put to the Irish people properly by way of referendum or by way of general elections. Is this what we really want? Is this really, really what we want? Because I don't believe it is, and I think that I would say to those that are in mainstream media that are listening to this episode of Counterpoint, get the report, read the report, do your own research, write your own columns. You see what I see. You might see it slightly differently, but the bottom line is that the underlying momentum of this report is shocking.
It is shocking, but the co-opting of the mainstream media, as we know, in the last few years, it's been shocking to watch how far they got over a few decades. But there was a survey a few years ago, and I think from the public, around a little short of 60% bought into climate change as a major issue that would affect them within their lifetime or their children's lifetime, right? It's absolutely not, but that was 60% almost. But when they went to a cohort of journalists across Europe, it was 80-something% believed it.
Wow.
So they've worked on the journalists even more than they've tried to brainwash the average hoi polloi. Our politicians also, they're Irish, right? They're not much different than the others, but they're Schleveens. And they know where the big hand is and where the big money comes from.
Yeah.
And they know what the big hand thinks is important. So that's why them and their public service will parrot what the big hand has said to them, and they'll just parrot it. And they won't even think outside of any box, because the other thing about the public service is we know it. I mean, I have lots of friends in it. It's a hierarchy, and you keep your nose clean, and that means you rise up according to your due time. The slightest leadership you show or questioning, you forget your career. It's the opposite of corporate that I grew up in my career, where leadership was what is rewarded. So naturally, they're just fodder, cannon fodder for totalitarians like the UN.
Absolutely.
Because they will do whatever they're told, and that means they'll get their raises, they'll get a new position, and they'll be looked after with a massive fat pension. And who cares if their country burns down around them in 30 years? Not their problem.
Yeah, I'm going to bring up, just going to switch topics here now slightly to something that's connected to, I mean, what we're seeing here is we're seeing a plan. We're seeing the modelling of a plan to basically have a massive increase in immigration coming into Ireland to make up for the fall in labour force, because the fertility rate is after collapsing from having 4 kids in the 1950s, and then it was 2 point whatever it was in the 90s, and now it's down to 1.53. But of course it is. I mean, that's what's going to happen when you make it almost impossible for a family in a country to actually have children, to get a home, and so on. And we know that there's a massive problem in the housing market. So I'm just going to put up this slide, which is slide 5.1 in the report, and this shows dramatically. I want to just remind people of this, that after the collapse, so there you have, there's the number of new houses being built. New per 1,000 people. And then you see a massive collapse. And of course, that's the global financial crisis. And I recall straight after that, the developers were taken out to the stockades in Ireland, on the newspapers, and slaughtered with the political establishment yelling on, because they wanted a fall guy, and the fall guy was the developers. So therefore, we stopped all investment in housing. And that's what happened. Look at the trough in housing, 2008, 2011, 2014, and then we're only crawling back. And according to this report, it's saying that the total pent up, the Housing Commission, it's referencing the Housing Commission, which is nothing new to Counterpoint, but the actual deficit we're sitting on at the moment is about 250,000 houses. They have a range 212,000 to 256. This is $250,000. That's the deficit. The actual supply is 30 to 33,000. And they're saying, whoa, we're going to build 60,000 houses a year on average for the next 5 years. And even if we do, we still have, they're saying that housing is still going to be unaffordable until 2040. So basically what they're saying is that you're going to be exporting your highly educated adult children out of Ireland, and we're going to be importing low-skilled, low-cost labour into Ireland to replace them. And they're going to put up with substandard housing and all the other things that go with it. And that's our plan. That's the shock of the report for me.
It is shocking. Basically, they will import the third world while they export the first world Irish, if you want to call it that. It's astonishing. And again, at the risk of being redundant here, I'll have to say, there is no way that your politicians, no matter how venal and useless, in any sovereign country, and the public service even within that country, would ever do what you just described willingly or with their own volition. So it's just a very important message for any watcher. None of this comes organically from within any Irish Indigenous group, political group, or organisation. None of it. So it's just important. It all comes, and we have it fully published from Soros to UN, and the documents of replacement migration, 2001, I think, the UN, might have been EU. It has been written, and it's fully on the historical record. They are simply following orders, and people need to think about that. Your country is literally being put down the tubes. The children will have no houses. They'll have to leave the country, and we'll import basically unskilled, highly differently with view to women and respect for women and religious weird stuff. We're importing that, and we send our children out. Our guys are doing that as a policy at the beck and call of non-Irish NGOs and organisations.
And supranational organisations. Okay, listen, I think we've kind of fairly well flogged it to death there, Ivor. All I'm saying to those watching is that this report, Future 40, this is the globalist plan here, laid out in Department of Finance language. That's the point that Ivor's making. And it's about goddamn time we woke up and saw it for what it was, and stop being... If you're taking your diet of information from mainstream media, you won't see this because it's been hidden from you. It's not been hidden from you on Counterpoint. If you like this content, you know what to do. Hit the two big buttons, like and subscribe. And if you think this content is important to share around, share it. That's the whole idea. And we'll keep this conversation going. In the meantime, Future 40 from the Department of Finance directly links to the speech made by Micheál Martin in COP30, which directly links to the comments made by the leader of the Social Democrats on the Late last Friday. That's it. Wake up and smell the coffee. Goodbye.
That'll do it, folks. Hope you enjoyed that, and hope you're all getting activism focused, given what's going on in the world. And again, a quick mention, link below to Pure Gold, and also that Morgan Stanley have actually done an horrific thing a few weeks ago. The classic 60-40 equities to bonds ratio of various investments over the past many decades, they've now actually had the temerity to say you should take 40% bonds and make it 20% bonds, 20% physical gold. So incredible to hear the top brass coming out with this. And also we've seen the Bond King come out and pretty much saying up to 25% in physical gold or silver perhaps. So that's the way the world's going. Even the big boys are reluctantly admitting it now. And the link is down below, but I'll finish off here with Eddie's little advert for a fantastic event coming up in Ireland, January 10th and 11th. And get in there before the tickets are gone. I'll be on stage and in the panels. It's going to be a blast.
It's time to pivot to solutions. We know the problems and the challenges. This coming January the 10th and 11th, I'm hosting the first ever IRL Forum, a solutions-driven national public conference with special guests speaking on issues Ireland faces today. Hence, this is the beginning of a comprehensive new discussion about what to do. Visit irlforum.com now for limited tickets with 20% off for early birds using my promo code EDDIE. See you there.